Today I'd like to talk about Stanley Milgram. The Milgram experiment along with the Zimbardo experiment are probably two of the worst ethical breaches ever in psychology. I don't think either one of them really thought that they were doing anything wrong necessarily at the time that the experiments were done. Zimbardo came later. Stanley Milgram is the one we're going to talk about today. So the story goes is that Milgram wanted to know, why was it in World War II that so many German people supported Hitler or the Nazi regime, or why did they go along with it? Why weren't there mass protests in Germany to say that what was going on was wrong? Because some of the population must have known what was going on, even if many did not. So Stanley Milgram came up with an experiment where he could not measure so much, but to see how likely people were willing to follow authority, unquestioned authority. So he came up with an experiment where someone comes in, they volunteer for a psychology experiment, they come in and they pull out of a hat. They're either going to be a teacher or a learner. Well, it's a setup because all of the piece of paper in this little hat, or whatever it is, all say teacher. You sit down in front of a broad bank of electrical switches and, well actually, let me back up. You're introduced to the learner, and the learner says, you know, I have a kind of a heart problem, but it's not a big deal. That's to set up in you a moral dilemma later on. So you go and you sit in front of a large bank of switches, and basically the short story is you think you're in an experiment that's about teaching word pairs, that you are going to be teaching this person word pairs, and if they get anything wrong, right, they get shocked. Well, the shock starts out from very, very mild, not a big deal, to at the other end of this bank, it actually says, basically, you're killing the person. This is shocking them to death. And there's all kind of warning labels on this bank of buttons. You start out the experiment and the learner gets the word pairs correct. But of course, eventually what starts happening is they start to get the word pairs wrong. So what happens is that you buzz them, you shock them, and you hear from another room, because you can't see them. I think in the original experiment they were back to back, but eventually got to the point where the person being shocked, so to speak, was not in the room. So here's sort of the rub, is was that other person ever being shocked or electrocuted? And the answer is no. In fact, all of the responses from your button pushing on this panel were all pre-recorded, so everyone heard the exact same response. From ow, ow, to like yelling and screaming, until finally, when you get farther up this bank of buttons, the recording, which you think is in real time, starts saying, no, I don't want to do this anymore. You're hurting me. My heart is hurting. Something is wrong. I want to get out. At that point, everyone in the experiment turns, because I didn't tell you this part, there's a experimenter sitting right behind you, and they'll turn and look at that other person and say, hey, what do I do? And that experimenter, who's really a psychologist, who's in on it, says, this is very important to us. We really need these results. Please continue. And you might guess what happened. You would think most people would say, no, I can't go on. I'm not going to do this. But most people continued. I believe it was like 63 or 65% of their sample actually went all the way to the end, where they would have killed this person using this electroshock machine, which again, they weren't really hurting that other person. So, how can this be? That when someone who seems to have authority tells you, this is important, please go on, that most people will in fact continue to do that thing, whether they believed in it or not.